Welcome to the Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello, gorgeous ones. Welcome, welcome. In today's society, women are often feeling unheard, unseen, burdened and burned out, trapped in a life of looking after everyone else whilst they've got some nagging frustration and shame that life isn't quite what they'd imagined. If you're numbing your body's screams and have a secret gnawing feeling you're here to be something more, yet you feel unworthy and doubt your own power to dream bigger and create a magical life, I've created a powerful portal of transformation called Invoke Your Wild Creatrix that guides you into the path of body wisdom, soul alchemy, and manifestation. Beginning October, we'll be guiding you to get intimately in touch with your heart, fall in love with your witchy self, illuminate your soul's deepest desires, and listen to the intuitive wisdom of your beautiful body so that you can courageously choose into dreaming bigger and recognize yourself as a powerful creatrix, capable of intentional manifestation of a magical life. Find out more at www.nicollebarton.co.uk/invoke-your-wild-creatrix. My guest today is the divine Sian Marie Pilkington, a woman of wordcraft, mother to four, deep-rooted energy worker, herbalist, birth attendant, retreat facilitator, and a community creator. Sian walks women through the rites of passages and blood mysteries of life, from monarchy to birth, miscarriage and menopause. She's a spiritual midwife to women resisting the modern disturbance of the mysteries in order to heal and reclaim old ways in a modern world. In her own words, she honoured the medicine of the mother by hearing and following the call to become a birth worker, where she learned about the ignorance of patriarchy in a goddess's birthing space, the divinity of family-led birth, and the sacred rage and glowing holiness of women all at once. In this episode, we begin to understand the reverence of blood and our feminine cycle, what blood mysteries are, and their importance as a wild creatrix. We also explore how the cycles of our blood mysteries offer us a sacred rebirth and how we can honour these rites of passage with the reverence and respect they deserve so that we can move through each stage of our life expanding into our fullest selves. Welcome, Sian. It's really gorgeous to have you here on the show. I was introduced to you a few months back, actually, and I have absolutely been loving, I have to say, your posts on social media. They just kind of drop me straight into the heart and straight into this like pool of wisdom. It's just gorgeous. So yeah, I'm really delighted that you're here with us today to kind of share more on the mystery of blood and how it offers us a sacred rebirth. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
That's okay. And I think probably the first place that I invite people to start is kind of their own personal journeys. So I wonder if that feels a good place for you for us to start, or where to dive in.
Well, my first blood mystery was Monarchy, and it was eventful in the way that my mother shouted it out to the house, which was my brother and my dad, and there was some embarrassment that came up initially for that. On my mum's side, excitement, but from my side there was embarrassment. And so my first memory with my blood is of there being like this undercurrent of excitement from the feminine, but embarrassment from the feminine that was coming up inside of me. And I was so disenchanted with it and so disconnected from my blood that by the time I was pregnant with my first baby, I didn't even know for 5 months. I was 20 weeks along by the time I found out I was pregnant, because I had no awareness of what was going on in my body. I was very much patriarchally programmed. I'd gone through school, into university. I was keeping up with the big boys and stuffing my breasts and my womb and my blood into kind of starched shirts and trying to keep up. So by the time I met the biggest mystery of the feminine, birth and pregnancy, I was completely unaware. So with the birth of my first baby, she's going to be 15 in a couple of days. I feel like the mystery had to bomb through me, literally like a bomb, in order to shake me back into my feminine body, for me to feel like the kundalini and the like volcanic eruption of the feminine through my body. And she burst through me very fast in like 3 hours, and my body was completely unscathed, and I was left like this pool of quivering ecstasy and like, what the heck just happened to me? And
Wow.
it connected me deeply back to the feminine. Not so much that I was deep into the feminine path of womb mysteries and healing. I was still young and I was still had lots of healing to do, but it essentially pulled me back to the wisdom. I had done nothing to make, well, I'd done something to make the baby, but I'd not done anything to grow the baby. She just continued to occur despite me being unhealthy and toxic, you know. And then she burst through me with this ferocity. My body just opened and allowed her forwards fast. And then I was able to scoop up her to my breast and heal. And so I was made aware of this innate wisdom and ability to be like Shakti and to be feminine power without really having to do anything other than allow that to flow, which is Tantra, right?
Wow.
So,
Wow. So much in that.
yeah, well, that was my first baby. I had 3 more daughters after that. And through the course of that, by the time I was pregnant with my third baby, I was training to be a doula, because I was a journalist. And I had the first and only episode in my life where I can honestly say that I heard God audibly. That something just said to me, be a doula. And I was sitting on my friend's couch in our living room pregnant. And I said, oh, well, I know what that is because I just wrote an article on one, and I just went home, signed up and did it. And then I was pushed full force then into the world of birth. And then that is really where the thing that's kind of catapulted me deeper into the blood mysteries.
Wow. There's so many places that I could go here now. It's like, which one do I go to first? I think the first thing that stood out to me when you were talking was this kind of, I think what the secret witch kind of often feels actually, and this is this kind of idea of shame. And I just wondered if you could talk to that really, because I think just even kind of going into talking about blood mysteries, I suspect many of the secret witches may not even know what they are. So maybe we can start there and kind of explore what the blood mysteries are, and how they're important, and then perhaps touch on like the shame that we often feel.
I associate the blood mysteries with the rites of passage that women go through. Okay, so we're talking first and foremost monarchy, the first blood. And that is typically where shame really does become to be imprinted inside of us with the first flow of our own blood, although there are whispers of it before. And then we move forwards to the loss of the blood with pregnancy, and then the return of the blood through the act of birth and thereafter. And then the full circle back to loss of blood again with menopause. So we're going through the moon cycle of waxing with the maiden into monarchy, blood of the birth with the mother at the south of the wheel, if you follow the Celtic wheel, and then the waning through with the enchantress and the wild woman, where you're approaching kind of perimenopause, where we're very, very sensual and in our subtle kind of feeling body as we kind of like reap the twilight years of our bleeding. And then we come through to the north of the wheel with the dark moon and the crone, where it begins to where we retain our blood for ourselves and keep that as like the knowledge of our ancestors, the legacy that we're going to pass forwards, like, you know, the retention of it. So I see the blood mysteries in the formation of this Celtic wheel of the year, which also mimics the season, which also mimics the cycle of the moon.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I have seen actually the kind of link with the cycle and the moon, but I think more on a kind of month to month kind of I've read Wild Power by Shani Hugo-Elitzer and Alexandra Pope, and so that to me kind of is where my focus has been with kind of the moon cycle and my own cycle. I think it's just kind of more of a looking at it monthly, but actually, wow, yeah, now you said that, it's really amazing actually when you look at the whole life cycle.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the seasons.
I was going to ask a little bit more actually, just going back to the shame, about kind of how you alchemize that shame, I guess, because I think probably some of the secret witches that are listening may be kind of stuck with some shame or kind of be interested in knowing how to alchemize the shame about blood.
Good question. I'm going to go anecdotally and try and take it back to my own experience to see how that happened for me. And I think the way that it alchemized for me was with the birth of my daughter, for sure, because there was no hiding anything. Birth brings out in you the most primitive, the most primal, and you're unable to hide from yourself or from what wants to come out of you. So it was almost like a trial by fire. That was the way that it was. And I'm really fortunate that I have a partner. I've been with him for 21 years. He's the father of my children, and he's never created any sense of shame in my body around that. And so one thing I think that could really help us as women is connecting our partners with our cycles so that they're aware of what this looks like and the importance of it and how it connects to everything and how they can be a part of our fertility and the protection against pregnancy, and they can be connected to kind of like our libido cycle, and that can be very empowering for them, which in turn can be very empowering for us, because rather than this being a shame piece that we're trying to hide away or hide from or stuff up, plug up, try to take away with prescription drugs, it suddenly becomes this connective tissue between us all, right? And they're knowledgeable about us and we're giving the knowledge to them. So it can be like a gift exchange of them accepting our blood and us actually offering information about it. So I feel like a lot of the shame that's been put in place has been from the patriarchy, which is originated with men. Patriarchy is obviously not just men now, but it originated there. So going back to the source and trying to help them understand the holiness of it can be what begins to heal us around the shame of blood.
I love that. Yeah. And that feels kind of particularly pertinent to magical witches, I suppose, who have kind of felt that witch wound of the patriarchy, I guess, for want of a better way of describing it. Yeah, I love that. And I suspect as well, some of the secret witches listening will be, and by secret witches, we're talking about powerful women who don't necessarily know their own power. And I suspect often, because as is the case with my own journey, I think, is that the witch is really disconnected, or the secret witch, should I say, is really disconnected from her own body. So I think even kind of just beginning to connect in for ourselves as well can be really, really powerful in healing that shame.
For sure. It's a case of reclamation, and I think secret witches especially, that's a pertinent part of their journey is reclamation, and that's why we do it in secret for so long, because it doesn't feel safe to reclaim it out loud. It's a personal reclamation. And so I think working with our blood in terms of the cycle itself, and there's a really great book out there called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. It's like a Bible for the cycle, and it helps you to understand what different cervical fluid means, what different temperatures mean, and keeping a journal of some sort, or a diary around how you feel through the course of your cycle can help you to extract your own medicine, can help you to understand more about your own body. So it isn't necessarily just about the flow of your blood, but about what it is that leads up to it.
I love that. And I think that brings it back actually for me to that the book Wild Power, which very much links in like how how creativity works with the menstrual cycle as well. So yeah, love that. Yeah, gorgeous. The other thing that was interesting for me was how you said that your birth was like this bomb, but it sounds like you had quite a positive experience of that. Is that right?
Yes. And I think that as a doula, what I've seen over the 9 years is that women have this, we're beginning to really create ideological scenarios out of birth now that women really have their eyes open to how beautiful it can be. They create these very ideological scenarios with twinkle lights and, you know, like music playing in the background and the candles. And there's usually a time and place for that gets us out of our beta brainwave down into our theta brainwave and delta. You know, it sinks us through the altered states. But at its core, birth is primitive power. It's creation, right, that comes through you. And so yes, they were absolutely beautiful, positive experiences, because nobody took that rite of passage, that initiation away from me. I experienced it for myself without being interfered with, but they were still very intense. They still blew me open. And it was like such a destruction of ego every single time. And you're left shaking with oxytocin pouring through your body, which is the hormone of orgasm, and like DMT, right? That's pouring through your body. So you can't help but be in a bliss state, but you're still just like, that was creation just came through me. That was extremely intense.
I love that. And one thing that's really interesting for me particularly, and I don't know, maybe Secret Witches have also had this kind of experience of birth, but when I was pregnant, I very much experienced what you're talking about, like, wow, this is being created without me even doing anything. And then I got to birth and it went horrifically wrong for me. Like, it was just everything, like I was going to birth at home in a water birth and all of this stuff. And yeah, it's just so interesting. I mean, I gave birth during COVID, so I mean that was quite tricky as well. But it was just interesting to me that it felt to you like there was this, yeah, there was just this primal power, when mine felt completely the opposite. So I'm really curious about that. Yeah, I'm just, I suspect it's because, again, I was kind of in the system, as it were, although I don't know, it feels like kind of almost a victim way to look at it. I think I could probably own that some way some way better.
I hear you totally. But I think, I don't know your birth experience. I don't want to presume anything, but you mentioning that you were in the system, that goes a long way, because, you know, fundamentally we are mammals, and the way that we make a baby is very mammalian and very primitive. And what we need essentially when we're giving birth is a scenario of safety and privacy. The same conditions that we would have sex in is what we ideally need to bring the baby out, right? So when we move out of our home and into an institutional setting, it becomes very clinical. And our good girl that's behind the secret witch, the one that wants to step forwards in public, very much takes over. And so we become people pleasers. And we also are very aware of these people that are indoctrinated into us as authorities. It's really easy for us to kind of be like, you take the lead, because I've been told my entire life that you know better than I do. And so first experiences go like this quite often, because it's we're most aware of, the institutionalized birth. But when we bring birth home, we're the queen of the castle, and people find it a lot more difficult to kind of coerce us. It still happens. It still happens at home, but people find it a lot harder to coerce us when we're in our home habitat, and we can hire and fire and move people out of the way. And we're going into an altered state. Birth needs us to go down from this beta wave brainwave state that I was talking about, that we're in now talking. And we need privacy and darkness and melatonin in our body to activate this, like going down through the layers.
Actually, as you're talking, it just reminds me that one of the things that kind of led me into the descent into kind of my wild witch, I guess, was this birth. Really, it was like it landed me firmly back in my body. But the funny thing is that I hadn't really seen that I was wild before, and it was the experience of birth that had me kind of unleash my wild, perhaps not in the best of ways, to be honest. But yeah, it's and still, yeah, I've kind of learned to love all of that as well, because
Yes.
at the end of the day, wild is wild. So
Yes, exactly. And I've seen all manners of kinds of births. Like, there isn't very many kind of births that I haven't seen over the time now. And that is exactly it, Nicole. Like, you find the wild woman in there, and that's the medicine out of it for us. Yes, we know we're going to have this beautiful baby, but like, knowing that we have that inside of us to come back to is beautiful.
Gorgeous. So where to go next? Yeah, let me feel into where to go next. I think one of the other things, which is what this episode is about how the mystery of blood offers us a sacred rebirth. So I wondered whether we could talk to the sacred rebirth idea.
So let's just think about the cycle itself. Well, when we first begin our bleed as teenagers, we're stepping away from the mother's apron strings. You know, we're firmly cutting ourselves away and beginning a new life. I had a dream with my second born, who's 11, about 2 years ago, in which we were in a cave and she was just ahead of me, and there was my eldest daughter was with her friend who was already menstruating in real life. They went off into the cave, and then my second daughter was in front of me, and she was kind of like looking babyish in a snowsuit, but she was on a piece of ice and it broke away from me, and she started to go off into the cave, and she was looking back shouting, "Mom, Mom." And I said, "I can't come, you have to go." And so she went off into the cave and I stayed behind with my 2 little ones. I cut to the next scene in the dream, and I'm in my house. My eldest and her friend come back through the door like nothing happened, and I say, "Where's Esme, my second born?" "Oh, she isn't back yet." And she never came back in the dream. And when I woke up, I understood that it was her beginning to go through the descent into puberty. She just left me, right? And I couldn't go with her. She'd followed the big girls and they'd come back, but she was still out there in the cave somewhere. And when she does begin to menstruate, that will be a rebirth for her. She'll come back to me like those girls did, and it will be time for her next sister to go along. So there's this time, this limbo space between death and rebirth, where you don't really know where you are. And that can be really difficult. This is like, if you know the myth of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, she goes down through the 7 gates from heaven to the underworld and lies dead on the floor for 3 days before she's reinvigorated and goes back up, having become whole for experience in the underworld. And that's what we have in the menstruation. It's a complete flat. We're not neither here nor there. You know, we're just in this dark void of like potential. And then we come out the other side with no blood flowing from us, with like pure potential ahead of us. And that's the rebirth to me. And we can see that in the menstruation cycle. We can also see that in the postpartum, where you birth your baby and then you're suddenly left like with this like 3 days of what's happening. I'm in a bit of a void. And then you come out of it. And also when your blood stops, you have a complete rebirth into your full crone, into your wise woman. You go from being this bleeding creatrix to I am a ancestral body of knowledge. You know,
Yeah,
that's how I see the rebirth.
I think that's gorgeous, and really kind of suggests that, you know, every month we get to be reborn, which is, yeah, I think that's gorgeous. And I think it's also something that perhaps the women listening may not have a sense of, because I where they're at and where I was at was probably more just thinking that bleeding was a bit of a pain, a bit of a and actually literal pain sometimes, because I mean I suffered with endometriosis and things like that because of this kind of disconnect to my bleed.
Well, let's look at that from a point of view of us as women, and women are the healers of the world, really. There's lots of talk around periods shouldn't be painful. Well, yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, they wouldn't, but we grieve hard for the shit that goes on in this world. The women are the ones that grieve, like the Irish that used to keen and cry and wail when people died. That's what's going on inside of our bodies, and our womb holds it and cramps and clenches because we are women that grieve for all the stuff that goes on in the world. So there's, I don't like the narrative that bleeding should never be painful, because that's not our experience as women. This narrative that periods shouldn't be painful, which is becoming really popular. I mean, it makes some sense physiologically, but from a spiritual and emotional point of view, it's very dismissive of the fact that we're holding pain of many. You know, we wail and grieve for other people, and we also we can be very empathic and hold the feelings and grief of others in our body, especially in our womb. So I think that can bring shame in for some women when they say that periods are painful and distressful for them, when in actual fact, this really just reiterates the reason why we should be resting through our period, through our bleed. Because if we could rest through it, we could just let grief move through us, or whatever it was that was creating this kind of like gnarly feeling inside of our bodies. If we can be with a feeling, it tends to pass a lot quicker than having to stuff it up.
Yeah, I think I'm actually just kind of even likening it to this cycle of death. You know, if something is dying, then we need to give it that space and time, like you say, to grieve. So actually, even just that kind of the way you've explored that there, really does suggest that, you know, actually all is welcome, you know, even the pain. And yet we're so kind of conditioned that that's not how it should be. So yeah, it's interesting. Gorgeous. And again, it brings us back to that kind of cycle, because you know, even in the seasons, you know, we have winter. It's not like we try and avoid that. So
right, we want to hibernate then. We don't want to be out running and jogging in the street.
Exactly. Gorgeous. Where to go next? I think there was a question actually that I had from one of the group members in my Secret Witch Circle group. I'm just trying to see if I can find that, because I think it was quite a good one. So it was, what are your views on creating menstrual ritual and magic for young people around their first bleed? What ideas do you have for helping to celebrate and mark the magicalness and specialness of this time?
Oh, I love the question, because I love to do that. These are called Monarchy Ceremonies, and I facilitated some before my eldest was bleeding, so before other people's young girls. I love it because this is the first initiation for a female, and so if we miss this one, like, this isn't to shame anybody that hasn't done it, we can always do better later, right? But if we miss this one, it becomes really easy for us to continue missing, celebrating and marking rites of passage. When we don't mark a rite of passage, it's very hard for us to move out of that archetype. So if we don't mark maidenhood, it can be very hard to move into motherhood feeling complete. If we don't mark motherhood, it can be very hard to move into the wild woman without feeling complete, you know, and so on. So for me, the rite of passage of Monarchy is the purpose of it for me is to, yes, celebrate the young girl, but to also create some sort of challenge in which she's tested as to whether she's ready to leave maidenhood behind or not. See what choice she makes, surrounded by people that really love her. So I'll give you an example. This is what we did for my eldest daughter, Isabella. I gathered the women. She's got I don't live with any of my family here. They're all in England, but they've got many aunties and friends. So we brought the women in, and everybody wore red. And the first thing that we did was meditate. And we meditated on the cave of the womb. And then the women spoke about their experiences with menstruation. They gave her advice. One of them, and some of them were talking very much around shame, like how to release this sense of shame, how to anchor into the power of bleeding, and how that means that you're bigger than anybody that wants to kind of dumb you down, right? One of my friends is a shaman, so she drummed and took her off, and she found a spirit, and she found a medicine name for herself through song. My daughter did. And then she came back into the group. We'd created a threshold. I washed her hands and feet. And then she came further forward where all the women were, and she had her favorite stuffed animal that she'd had since she was born. And I said, are you ready to be brought into the circle of women? And I said, if so, it's time to hand Hubba over. He belongs elsewhere now. And so she shed some tears and she was like, oh, okay, yes, I'm ready. And she handed over her bunny, stepped into the circle. Everybody loved on her, brushed her hair, massaged her, and fed her food. And then when she sat down and we kind of had eaten and pulled some cards, Hubba was given back, and it was like, Isabella, you passed a challenge. You were willing to give up your childhood to sit with a circle of women, and in repayment, you get your beloved back, kind of thing.
Oh, I love that. That's so gorgeous. So yeah, part of me was going, oh no, she has to give up her.
No, I know. And that's why I don't tell anybody. Like, she has 3 sisters, and she was told specifically, don't make mention of what it is that we do in this circle, because it's sacred. This is something that was in woman's circle, not child circle, and you don't want to put them off getting to that place. We also used beets and like cut beets open and like pressed them onto our hand and moved it around the circle so that there was a joined circle. I wear red string at the very beginning of the circle. Before we begin, we wind in so for example, I would say, I am Sian, daughter of Gaina, granddaughter of Marie and Astrid, mother of Isabella, Esme, Ivy, and Hazel. And I'm here because I'm the mother of Isabella who's begun to bleed, and I want to appreciate and honor her in her journey. And then everybody does that. So we have this circle of like matriarchy and like grandmas. It's lovely.
That is gorgeous. I really, really love that. Now I'm like, gosh, I wish I had that when I was going through that time as well. Yeah. And I suspect,
I do too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I suspect that's how you feel, rather than it just being kind of shouted out to, to your whole family. But and yeah, it's interesting because it seems like your mum was very like she was celebrating you at the same time. But yeah, that feels a much more aligned kind of initiation, I think, what you've just described.
Yeah. I come from a very matriarchal family. We're like a blue collar family, and everyone's back doors open, and you come in for tea, and the grandma, like my auntie's always just wandering around the place, and they've got the nose in your business all the time. Very matriarchal, but also very like chop chop, get to the point, not very ceremonial at all. And I don't have any problem with that. I love that about my childhood. But at this time in the world, when there's like kids are coming forward with a different kind of consciousness, I feel like it needs something different. And actually, it's not new, it's very, very old. All those rituals and ceremonies are ancient. So we kind of get tarred with this new age stuff, but really it's not. It's like as old as the hills, right?
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Yeah. And do you have any kind of I guess if people haven't had that kind of ceremony and they're wanting to mark where they are now, is there anything that you would offer for them, if that makes sense?
I really like I'll do new moon circles with women, and full moon circles more with family celebrations. And you don't have to get together in a group of people to do this, but have you heard of the red tent?
Yes.
Yeah. So if anybody hasn't heard of it, who's listening, the red tent was a space where women used to gather at the dark of the moon, because when we were not infiltrated by fluorescent lights, most people's cycles would follow the moon, because it would make sense from a physiologic purpose. When there was no moon, at the full of the moon, with the bright light coming down into our bodies, into our pineal gland, it would spark ovulation. So it would ovulate with the full moon. And then 2 weeks later, at the dark moon, when there was no light in the sky, we would bleed, and women would come together in a red tent or a hut, and they would bleed on hay together, and they would share stories and heal and feel and sing and do all that stuff. And we can still come together in community to do that, but we can also I'm a solitary witch a lot of the time too. You can do this stuff by yourself. So if you just want to begin to mark where you are with your moon cycle, you can either follow your own moon cycle, because we don't all necessarily bleed. I bleed at the full moon. we can bleed at different times, but you can create ritual around that. So maybe ovulation, you want to use intention setting and wishing and desiring and bringing all that in and journaling around that. And maybe at the dark of the moon, you want to salt wash, bathe, and give your blood to the earth and give back, you know, and let go, like burn something, write down what you want to let go of, what's not serving you anymore, and burn it. So you can use both your cycle, but you can also use the light of the moon together with other women and do it kind of archetypally. Just be like, it's dark moon, we're just gonna like set some intentions and come together and love together. And it's full moon, okay, let's burn this, that we don't, what do you hate, what's not working for you right now, let's write it down and burn it, you know. So there's ways to honor it singularly and in group.
Yeah, I love that. And also you just reminded me of another question that actually was in the group that I was going to ask you that I'd forgotten about. When you talked about returning your blood to the earth, I was going to ask you about the practicalities of that. And that was a question that came up in my group. And I remember all I could offer, although I have started to do this practice, all I could offer was that when I first started, I just tried to kind of scrape it on a bay leaf, and that wasn't that wasn't comfortable at all. So they're very spiky. So in terms of practical ways, like how do we do this?
Right. Well, there's a couple of ways. Like I've used something called a moon cup, a diva cup, for about 5 years now. And the menstrual cups, they're reusable and they're very environmentally friendly, but because it's a cup, a silicone cup, it captures your blood inside of there. So I pour that into a glass, like into a big jar, and fill it with water, and then just take it. It won't keep well. So if you were going to a circle in 2 weeks' time, it's not going to keep. You need to use it at the time. And then I usually just offer it to my like grass or my garden. I've just got a small garden and I'll just offer it out there. If it's something like, I work with the Celtic Wheel of the Year, so if it's a Sabbath, then I'll usually use it in more of a ceremony outside of the house. Another way to do it is to use, if anybody has ever used cloth pads, you can just leave them soaking in a bucket and overnight, because you really need to rinse them in cold water first anyway, and then that water that's left in the pail, you offer that to the earth also. It's very hard to do it if you're going to use tampons or if you're going to use disposables, but you know, if the women are listening to this, I think it's because they want to connect to their menstrual cycle. And I'm not somebody that thinks people need to go out getting this, that, and the other for anything to be a witch or to be connected to their body, but beginning to take out toxic things from their body when it comes to their cycle is first and foremost. Tampons are toxic, and the perfumeries that patriarchy has wanted to put onto our sanitary products, including disposable pads, is toxic to our body. And it's also trying to cover up something that we're trying to reclaim, including scent, right? So I think it's really worthwhile investing in some cloth pads. You can get them even on like Etsy stores, and you really only have to get 3 or 4 at a time and wash them overnight if you want to. There's period underwear, so you can just bleed straight into them if you want. And
I have to say, after my bay leaf experience, I did invest in some eco kind of pads and
you did?
I did, yeah. And
good for you.
That's been way better. And also my body for a long time has been a no to tampons and things like that, so good. So yeah, it's for me, again, like you say, it just feels very toxic. So that was just my body personally choosing that actually, no, I don't, this just doesn't feel right anymore. So really interesting. I think I suspect again that some secret witches may be listening to this being like, well, why on earth would we be doing this? Like, why? What's the purpose? So I wonder if you can talk to that as well.
I think it's a completion of the cycle. For one, just being able to look at your blood it gives you a lot of knowledge about what's going on inside of your body. If it's going straight down the toilet without you looking, you don't know if there is any clots, you don't know the color of it, really the volume of it. You're not being told very much about where your body's at right now. Whereas it's just the same as if you've had a baby. Who thought you were going to stare at baby poo? But you do, because it tells you a lot, right? So your body is from the inside out, is giving you information. So for us to reclaim knowledge and power of ourselves, I think it's good for us to see it and know what the consistency, what it looks like. And then you've got this aspect of fully facing what feelings come up for you when you smell it and see it, because sometimes there is shame. There's like a puckered face and like, oh, I don't like this. Why? There's a chance for you to explore that, like what feels shameful, what feels gross about this right now. And thirdly, it's just the completion of that cycle. If you're able to collect it, this is the culmination of you having potential, joy, vitality, then sexuality, libido, creation, and then like a waning and refinement through the course of your cycle. By giving it back to the earth, it completes it. It's like, I'm done with this. I no longer need this. I don't need to hold on to any things that I didn't complete through this cycle, or any feelings that I had that came up that don't feel good anymore, or any babies that were not made that I'm sad about, or any, anything. I'm finished and done with it. I give this back. Earth, transmute it.
Yeah, I love that. Like the releasing of what no longer is required, and all the grief as well, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And we haven't touched on kind of menopause, so I wonder if you could speak to that as well, because I suspect that would be really useful for some people listening.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a family where my grandma had a hysterectomy young, 45, and my mum began to go through perimenopause, I think around that age. So I'm 38, and the idea of me only having 7 years before I either have no womb or I start going through perimenopause makes me feel like I need to start preparing for it already now. It's another, what happens in our culture is really, it's not even just about getting to menopause and not bleeding. It's about us not being in maidenhood anymore. We become a feeling of being non-valued seems to occur for women. We like really want to keep on top of our appearances and women even try and keep their voices sounding young and speak like babies sometimes, because inherently we feel like we're most valued when we're young, when we're in our youth. And so all the fairy tales talk about the witch of the woods, the hag, the ugly one. She's no longer bleeding. She's not worth anything anymore. She's not valued. And there's a discrepancy between that and the truth, which is a woman who's in a chronohood has made it so far into life. She just comes with all of this life experience and ability to hold the younger generations of women. And so I think the importance of reclaiming our femininity through menopause is that it helps society to start remembering that the old women for a long time were the most valued, and in many cultures still are. Like, they hold the elders up on a pedestal because they come with such knowledge, and we respect them. And that isn't happening in the Western world. We're just discarding of women once they no longer bleed because they're not pretty, they're not skinny, and they're not creating anymore outwardly. We have so much to offer still in those chronohood years. So I think we can support our body, for one, much more with herbs through menopause so that we're not relying on pharmaceuticals. And I think that we can begin to talk about women in their aging. My mentor calls it saging. That's a lady called Sarah Durham Wilson. And begin to elevate the elder once more so that she's back on her rightful spot, rather than us being ashamed of losing our blood and feeling this sense of no longer being valued,
Yeah, that's gorgeous. So it's interesting again how kind of shame comes up right at the other end of the spectrum. It's like, yeah, really interesting that really what we're talking about is that she's this like really wise woman. It's like that's being missed almost.
Absolutely. And the mature feminine is a very dangerous person. She's a very dangerous archetype, the mature feminine, because she takes no bullshit, basically. If you know any strong-minded elders who are female, one of the things that stand out about them usually is that they cut to their chase. There's no more prancing around, tiptoeing around this and that. They don't have time for it. They're much closer to death than the rest of us, just by default. And so there is no more time for that, you know. And when the society is faced with women who have no more time for nonsense, they feel afraid of it, because they know that they're going to get called out for the places that they're coming up short.
Yeah,
Right?
I can really feel the energy of the witch in that, actually. This kind of powerful, wild woman. I don't know if wild woman's the right word for that, but yeah, just this power, this level of power.
Like, she alchemizes more than anybody, because she's got so much life experience to draw upon, you know?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's gorgeous. And in terms of, I guess, rituals or ceremonies to honor that, do you have anything to offer there?
The way that I've done this for a friend of mine, I mean, I don't feel very well equipped to be somebody that's guiding ceremony for cronehood, because I'm not yet there, right?
Yeah.
But I have been asked, and so I've done it before. And I've done something called a closing of the bones, and this is something that I do with postpartum women. And the purpose of closing of the bones is, well, after pregnancy, it's musculoskeletal, like there's a physiologic bringing back everything into alignment. But the spiritual aspect of doing this, we go down the body and we tie up all of the energy centers with scarves very tightly. I usually say it tell a story over the woman. I really like the myth of Mad Woman Mish, and you can find that in Sharon Blackie's book, If Women Rose Rooted. But it's about the reclamation of wild, basically. You tie up all the energy centers. I tell story over them, and then all the people that are there and present say prayers and well wishes and bestow upon the woman all the reasons why they love her and why she's valued and what we're excited for, like in the next phase of her life. And then we release all of the scarves and we open her into her next phase. And then we celebrate the way that you would any other rite of passage. Usually breaking bread, there's usually food involved. Women like to eat. and just well wishes and stories, and like, this isn't about you not being there anymore, this is all about you being here now, and look, we celebrate you and where you're going into, and like an elevation of the next phase rather than a grieving of the last.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Oh, well, we've got ceremony and ritual for every mystery here.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous. There's something I want to talk to about creativity and how we can kind of harness this kind of cycle for the witch's creativity. If there's anything in that, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is another good reason why people should take time to use a journal, even if it's only for 3 months, and chart how they feel each day, and even at the times of day through their cycle. Because I mean, if we were going to go on an archetypal kind of typical scale, usually around ovulation is when you feel most creative. Usually you come outside of your bleed and you are like just begin to open up to dreams and like what wants to come in, and hearing whispers of like potential. And then around ovulation you get like creative and you want to like start putting plans into motion. And then when you come around to like premenstrual, you want to tie up loose ends. And then when you bleed, it's just like quiet rest, release, dream space. So typically around ovulation is when people would really harness like the creative power of the blood, or that the blood cycle, the moon cycle. But that might not necessarily be true for you. You might find that when you're in this dreamy landscape of bleeding, that's when everything just wants to pour out of you. Or it might be premenstrual, when some people might be clearing up loose ends. Maybe that's when you're like, oh, last bits, last whispers, last snippets coming in, get them down quickly on paper. So I don't want to bunch everybody together with like ideology. It's good to really try to chart this. 3 months of moon cycle charting, like period charting, can be so fruitful.
Yeah, I love that. And I do actually do that for myself as well. And it is so illuminating, actually, to just, really begin to get in touch with your own rhythms, I think, as well.
And it works for the modern woman, because like you and I are talking today, you can plan interviews. Like if you know you're going out for an interview, you can be like, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. Like I'm on day 2. I'm going to be a puddle, right? So it works for the modern woman. Like, these are ancient things, but we're modern women still, and we can harness it to like help us in modern times.
I love that. And it's interesting actually, because my cycle has come back after kind of that postnatal period, and yeah, it was kind of a little bit irregular. So as you just said that, funnily enough, I booked reflexology for the day of my bleed when it was kind of expected, and funnily enough, it did actually arrive immediately after my reflexology. So yeah, that again, I've booked it in this time for the same time, and I just think that's really powerful to be able to know actually what's going on in our bodies, and be able to work with nature then to kind of create everything in balance. I think is really powerful.
We can use herbs for this as well to really support our system. Do you think people would like to hear about that, how we can use
I'm sure they would. Sure.
You can, there's a couple of herbs that I like to use, 4 really, but you could do with just 2. Nettle is a good herb to drink in an infusion. All of these will be infusions. I'll tell you how to make it after I've listed them. Nettle is great to use the whole month round because it is a blood builder, and it also derives from the planet Mars. Well, it doesn't derive, it's guided, like spiritually, its leader is Mars. So it creates like a sense of warriorship in us, which is a good thing for us to have as modern women. So drinking that all month round. And then red clover is the infusion to drink between bleeding, like just after bleeding until ovulation. That creates a really fertile landscape. So if you ever want to get pregnant, it creates a really lush landscape to get pregnant. And even if you don't, it's just a good cycle balancer. Oat straw is something good to drink just before your period, when you're like, your emotions can be heightened and your senses heightened, and we can just be a bit more squirrely. That's a nervine, so it helps calm and relax and soothe our nervous system. And then red raspberry leaves are the things to drink. That's the herb to drink during bleeding and just before. It really enhances our blood and helps it to flow freely. And so you make an infusion by using 1 ounce of herb to 4 ounces of boiling water, and you steep that for 8 hours or overnight, and then strain it and drink it. And if you feel like there are any imbalances going on in your cycle, like just incorporating some of those things as and when you feel like it, can be really helpful.
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, I'm going to be digging those out, I think, finding those. That's gorgeous. Well, I think pretty much we're just coming up to time now. So I feel like that's a really good place to end, unless there's anything else that you particularly wanted to add or offer in completion.
No, I'm just very grateful that you asked me to speak about this. I think it's important, and it's nice to be given the space to offer it for you.
Thank you so much. I think it'll be actually really serving for the secret witches out there listening. It's been a really, really gorgeous exploration, I think, of something that's probably not talked about that often. So I guess just before we do complete, I'd also like to invite you to just share what you're up to and where people can find you, so that they can follow you and see all your beautiful writing that I mentioned at the beginning.
Oh, thank you. I think the best place to find me, I have a website and all of my services are on there, but most of that is for people that are local to me. So Instagram is probably the best place, and that's at mother.becoming. And I also have a second page, which is at the Enchantress Well. And on both of those, I offer birth services remotely also. So I do lots of prenatal work with people that want to dive into both the spiritual and psychological and physiological aspects of birth. But I also run retreats and host workshops both online and in person with the Enchantress as well, which is a co-creation of mine. And that's very much about sinking into the wild witch within. The whole thing is about the wild woman archetype within us, who is here now to explore like the fullness of her witchy nature, and the kind of like the inner priestess, right? So they're the two places that are best to find me, especially if you're interested in any events or workshops or anything like that.
Gorgeous. Well, yeah, I wish I had known about you before I gave birth to Lily. And yeah, but I'm glad I know you now. So
yeah,
there we
congratulations on the birth of Lily.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's been a delight. So thank you.
All right, love. Thank you too.
Well, that was a gorgeous episode with Sian. There was so much wisdom in that. My takeaways are: the blood mysteries, first blood, moon cycles, birth, and menopause offer us an opportunity for sacred rebirth when we fully embrace them. There's often shame felt around these rites of passage, and that can be alchemized by beginning to reconnect to our bodies, both with ourselves and with our partners and families. Each blood cycle offers us a dark void of potential in which we experience death and rebirth, and along with this comes a sense of grief. This grief is often why we experience pain and disconnect with our bleed, and despite resistance and the expectations of society, we must honour our grief and welcome it. The power of ritual and ceremony is huge in reclamation of our blood. Instead of shaming the rites of passages all women go through, they can be consciously celebrated and honoured in various ways to help us move into the next stage of our lives. Offering invitations into each rite of passage can be really powerful as an initiation into choosing into the next phase of our lives. Each rite of passage is a doorway into the next phase, and this is to be absolutely celebrated. Without doing so, we can get stuck and unable to move out of each stage, meaning we are trapped in our younger stages of development. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.